Hi, Kate here with another video. Hope everyone is doing well. And if you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. It helps me build the channel. I'm hoping to eventually make this channel maybe a contribution to the class struggle. My last video was taken off YouTube. I still have it. It's on Rumble, and I'm going to start promoting my Rumble channel more. But you know, if you get a chance, please subscribe. I'm going to promote the Rumble channel, but please subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. I'm trying to build that up. Okay, my last video was on a transgendered woman from Las Vegas, Sarah Ashton Criollo. And my video wasn't my intention at all to mock her for being trans, and I don't think I did that. Her story is just so bizarre. Okay, she was basically a liberal Democrat, politically ambitious in Las Vegas, city politics. At one point, she apparently was an undercover operative, Democratic Party undercover operative in the Republican Party and the Trump campaign. And basically, then she was thought, what she said was foiling a right-wing attempt to disrupt the election as part of an attempted fascist coup. She talks about this. Then she looks like she was an informant for the FBI. She says this. A lot of weird stuff went on. It looks like she at one point informed on the Proud Boys, and basically she had to get out of Las Vegas really quickly. I pieced the story together from both liberal and conservative sources. So she had to get out of Vegas really fast, and she went to Ukraine and kind of reinvented herself as a war correspondent. Interestingly, she's still there. She's in Kharkiv, Ukraine, or a suburb of Kharkiv. She's embedded in the SBU. So the Ukraine very quickly embedded in the Ukrainian state security and in the Azov battalion. Now you see her as a Nazi apologist. She's saying, oh, they're super LGBT friendly, the Azov battalion, they're not Nazis. No, I think she's nonsense. The only reason they're treating her very well in Ukraine because she's parroting their narratives. I mean, there are some actual independent journalists who are very much risking their lives, who are more critical of the official NATO narratives. Patrick Lancaster, Graham Phillips, Eva Bartlett, so many other people. Some of these people are literally on a kill list, so they're risking their lives. So Sarah Ashton Criollo is parroting NATO narratives. She probably believes it herself. She thought she was fighting fascism in the U.S., and now she's actually supporting fascism in Ukraine, or apologizing for it. I admire her courage in some ways in doing what she's doing, but she's playing a pretty insidious role. Anyway, I talk about all this in my video. I'll post a link to it. It's kind of one of my favorite videos. Okay, now my channel is We Are Many, They Are Few, and I kind of originally meant it to be a class struggle from below. And I'm hoping to interview people involved in labor activism and struggles. It's very hard to do. I've contacted lots of people. A lot of people just, I have a small channel. I get that they ignore me, or sometimes, very often I get a polite brush off. Sometimes people agree to be interviewed, and then when I try to agree on a time, they just never get back to me. A couple of really cool, interesting people have agreed to be interviewed, and that's really great. And I'm not blaming anybody if they don't, whatever. It's a small channel. I get that. But I'm hoping to find more people to interview about labor struggles. I'm going to talk about that more. Also, my next video will be on water. The water supply. I thought about doing this last year. I'm just going to have to do tons of research on this, but a video series like Nestle is monopolizing the water supply around the world, and in my state of Maine. And I'm going to touch on this, and some weird stuff going on with the global food supply, like we're in for artificially created food crisis. Some weird shit's going on, the Dutch farmers in the Netherlands and stuff going on in Australia, and the left is pretty much ignoring all this, and if people are afraid of any hint of populism, I guess, the really left is kind of staying away from this as far as I know. So there should be a lot more emphasis on this. And I'm trying to break into some type of like investigative journalism or citizen journalism. Okay, so this video here is on politics. Much of like U.S. national politics is political theater anyway, even though it doesn't directly affect people's lives. But okay, I'm going to two topics here. First, the murder of the daughter of Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin, and the Calebgate Maupin meltdown. Both really interesting topics. Okay, Darya about a week ago, Darya Dugin, the daughter of philosopher Alexander Dugin, was murdered in a car bombing, which was apparently meant for Alexander Dugin, possibly meant for both of them. And I saw people all over, like Leftbook, leftist section of Facebook, and left Twitter were cheering this on all over, and I thought this was disgusting. I mean, whatever you think of Dugin or his daughter, just cheering this on, killing a thinker, was just sickening. So the same attitude towards Ashley, people saying, kill the fascists, kill the fascists. That attitude itself is fascism. Like I remember people were cheering on the killing of Ashley Babbitt. She was in the insurrection, the Capitol riot a few years ago. People were all over it. I know some prominent left-wing people were cheering this on. Now, Ashley Babbitt, interestingly, she was a liberal. She was a liberal, and she was originally a very enthusiastic Obama supporter. People thought Obama was going to be a transformative candidate, a transformative president. He obviously wasn't, but people had high hopes. And so Ashley Babbitt was disgusted by Hillary Clinton, and she moved to the right after that. And I don't agree with her politics, but I'm not going to cheer on her murder by the cops. Also, another guy is a guy who was killed. I forget his name. He erroneously believed to have tasered himself in the balls, in the cojones. He didn't do it, but people were mocking him and cheering him. And he died of a heart attack. And people all over Facebook were cheering this on. What happened is, apparently, he had also been a very enthusiastic Obama supporter. He's from Alabama. He went to D.C. when Obama was inaugurated, and he really looked great. Again, people had illusions in Obama, but then there's economic hard times hit Alabama, factories started closing, and this guy was drawn in by right-wing podcasters and moved to the right. If there was a half-decent left in the U.S., it could have communicated to these people, but no, they're all fascists, kill them, they're all fascists. That attitude itself is fascism. Like, fascism today is like anything the CIA, this U.S. security state doesn't like, they're all fascists. But they're sponsoring the people they do like, security state does like, they're the actual fascists. And I in no way support Trump. I'm not saying that. It's just, okay, anyway. So Darya Dugin, a little bit about Alexander Dugin. Okay, he's a Russian philosopher, Russian nationalist philosopher. His influence is a great interview by Mark Sloboda. There's several interviews. Mark Sloboda was an American who moved to Russia. He has Russian citizenship. He seems to strongly identify with Russia. He's a very articulate guy. I don't know what his politics are. Max Blumenthal interviewed him. Danny Haiphong had a really interesting interview with him. He's making the rounds right now. He's extremely articulate guy. He's very, very pro-Russian. Anyway, things about Dugin. First of all, the Western media massively exaggerate his influence. He's like the brains behind Putin, Putin's brain, or Putin's Rasputin. Like, it's a racist trope. Every Russian leader has to have a Rasputin. But he's a sinister master, fascist mastermind behind Putin. That appears to be nonsense. Seriously, it appears to be like Putin's ideologist, Putin's theoretician. It appears to be a nonsense. There's no evidence that they ever met. Putin and Dugin have never met. Putin has never referenced Dugin or mentioned him, doesn't appear to have read him, they don't appear to have anything to do with him. Dugin himself appears to be kind of a relatively marginal character. He's a philosopher, this like rare case of an academic philosopher, to some extent became a pop culture celebrity, like in the West Slavoj Žižek, of course, and Jordan Peterson. They were able to use media and some following. I don't have a high opinion of either one of those guys. Some of Žižek stuff was sort of interesting to read, but both these guys are kind of clowns. So Dugin, he was a bit of a media celebrity. 2014, after the Maidan coup in Ukraine, he wanted a much more stronger Russian response. He was a hardcore Russian nationalist, so wanted a more stronger response, and he was in the doghouse. Like, he was fired he was a philosophy professor at MGU, Moscow State University. He was fired, possibly by the Kremlin, the government, possibly Putin himself got him fired from his teaching job. And he was for a while banned from media. He was on after a small marginal media outlet called Tsargrad, which is kind of a right-wing Russian Orthodox, otherwise banned from me. He's apparently made a comeback in recent years, but for a while he was very much in the doghouse. So the idea of being the brains behind Putin is kind of nonsense. One of his books on geopolitics apparently is read by military cadets. I don't know what that means. I'm sure they read a lot of things. I don't know what that means, but okay, so a little bit about history. I'm far from an expert on Dugin. There's a Canadian guy, young Canadian guy. I forget his name offhand. He's been like the North American promoter of Dugin. He personally knows Dugin. He's promoter. He's on a bunch of YouTube videos and kind of explains his philosophy. I forget his name offhand, but if you're interested, what I know about Dugin, okay, he was a dissident in the late Soviet period. He was regarded himself as a Marxist of an eccentric variety, like Marxism without Feuerbach. Okay, this guy philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach was an influence on Marx, helped Marx move away from Hegel. Really complicated. Marx had this really great essay on Feuerbach's must-reading for any Marxist. Really great humanism. Anyway, I don't know what a Marxism without Feuerbach would be. Is a static Marxism? Apparently, it's probably a Marxism which would give a big opening for Russian nationalism, but who knows? Anyway, and also Dugin was in this Gurdjieff study group. Gurdjieff is a Greek-Russian occult philosopher, I think, who, I've known people who are into Gurdjieff. That kind of stuff was taken more seriously in Russia than is in the West. But anyway, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Dugin was a co-founder of the Russian Communist Party, the new one, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, not the Party of Lenin, obviously, but the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. He was a co-founder, and he wrote the Constitution. Probably moved it more of a Russian nationalist direction, I would guess. After that, he was a co-founder of what's called the National Bolshevik Party. That took the name from several currents in the German communist movement in the early 1920s. Long story, Germany lost World War I, and they had a really brutal, punitive Treaty of Versailles. Germany had to pay these reparations rates. It was designed to keep Germany economically crippled, basically. And at one point, France occupied the coal mining region of Germany. So these small group of German communists, several currents, tried to appeal to German nationalism in the right wing. It was a national Bolshevik movement. And, they were very unpopular, actually. So Dugin and these people got the name from the earlier German communist movement. The National Bolshevik Party apparently was supposed to be like a fusion of left and right. Their symbol, they had the Soviet hammer and sickle on a Nazi flag with a red background, a white, I don't know. Some people claim they were fascist. Very well could be true. One of his co-founders was a writer, Edward Limonov, who's an interesting writer. He's kind of a Russian beat writer, like Bukowski, a Russian version of Bukowski, very much so, from what I read by him. So Limonov, they had a falling out. Limonov left, and his group, he moved more to the left, and his group was more in anti-globalization and environmentalism and stuff. They appeared in. And Dugin eventually left. By the way, this party, the National Bolshevik Party, is actually still around. People often, like shitlibs, would stereotype it. Oh, Dugin's a National Bolshevik. The National Bolshevik Party today, it's tiny, very marginal party. Their members are harassed by the police. They're not really allowed to run candidates. That type of politics is unpopular and kind of suppressed in Russia today. So it's not true that Putin's a Nazbol. It's nonsense. Okay, so anyway, Dugin, after they became a Eurasianist. Okay, now, I read his book, was supposed to define he's politically evolved. His book was supposed to define his current politics. It was called the Fourth Political Theory. I haven't read the whole thing. I read like 2/3 of it, and the rest of it I got from reviews and other people talking about it. So the Fourth Political Theory, what he briefly says is, okay, liberalism failed. Like liberalism coming out of the French Revolution, what Marx called bourgeois democracy, like French Revolution, 1789, and all that failed. Second political theory he calls Marxism, which he means anything from communism to social democracy. That failed as well. Okay, the third political theory is fascism. So that it was crushed in the Second World War. It died, in its infancy. It was crushed in its infancy. He says that's a good thing. He condemns fascism. That's really race hatred, anti-Semitism was really he strongly condemns it. Okay, so the fourth book is like a search for a fourth theory, and then he talks about how like Russia, Eurasian cultures are naturally collectivist. Like it includes like indigenous cultures, Latin American cultures, Venezuela, and indigenous cultures, Native Americans as naturally collectivist, while it contrasts this against Eurasian cultures, Europe, Western Europe, the U.S., and so on. And he talks about a major culture clash, and he's kind of a Eurasianist. Like Eurasianism is a philosophy popularized by white Russian immigrants in the 1920s. It's basically, there's a sort of messianic streak in some Russian thinking. There's American exceptionalism, but there's a Russian counterpart to it, that somehow Russian culture is more spiritual, and they'll get beyond Western dualism and positivism, and they can show the world a different way. I don't get it. I lived in Russia. I've heard a lot of this. I don't get it. But anyway, Dugin has his unique version of Eurasianism, that like a multicultural Eurasianism. That, like I talked about earlier, the Tartar yoke. Like Tartars are an ethnic group, Turkic ethnic group, allied with the Mongols, and they ran Russia for 250 years. Dugin and some of his followers would say, it's not just Russian ethnicity, but it's the people, all the peoples in the Russian world, the Russian space, Ruski Mir type of philosophy. They're developing their own civilization, different from Western dualism and individualism and stuff like that. That's kind of what I got out of it. I don't have a high opinion of Dugin. I think he's kind of absurd. I don't agree with his philosophy. He's very strongly opposed to U.S. hegemony, which is one good thing. Very strong, like anti-U.S. imperialist. U.S. hegemony, believes in a multipolar world and cultures around the world developing their own way. I get where he's coming from, and some part of it I kind of agree with. But his Eurasianism, I think it's absurd. I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on Dugin, and there are few people on the left who have a more positive view of him. I don't know a huge amount about him. He's not a fascist. He's very often denounced fascism. He did go through a stage in the 90s where he flirted with fascism. Absolutely, yeah, and that's horrible. But Glenn Beck has some documentary on him where, Glenn Beck has this documentary where he cherry picks stuff he said from like 15, 20 years ago, which which gave the reputation. So the American and Western media built him up as like this sinister fascist mastermind behind Putin, which appears to be nonsense. I don't know a lot about his daughter, Darya. Well, I do know something about her. She recently got her PhD, or the Russian equivalent of a PhD. She was an investigative journalist. She was starting to develop a following as a journalist, something of a following. She was like a public intellectual, really young, like something of a public intellectual figure. Apparently, people who knew her say she's very likable, very warm, engaging people. And both these people, like the father and daughter, Dugin and his daughter, they love to talk and debate with people, which is a very good thing. Whether you like him or not, you don't cheer on killing thinkers. Like, I don't like Jordan Peterson. I think he's an absurd figure, but I'm not going to cheer on the murder of his daughter Michaela. I mean, that's insane. That itself is fascism. Oh, good, people all over Facebook were cheering on his murder. It's kind of disgusting. Dugin is opposed to U.S. hegemony. Now, I don't agree with him. It's kind of understandable the material reasons why he's thinking. I don't think he's even super popular in Russia, but there are material reasons why he might have some popularity. Russians would say that, look, we tried Marxism for 70 years and it didn't work. Then say we tried your Western liberalism and democracy and capitalism. That didn't work either. Now we're going to try our own way. I don't agree with this narrative, but I can understand why it has some popularity. So people were cheering on this stuff. It's just kind of disgusting. Like fascism is anything the U.S. security state doesn't like, while they're sponsoring the real fascism, basically. Which brings me to the next topic. Next, Caleb Maupin. Okay, I was following his group, and I'm in contact with a few people in his group. I interviewed Dust James and several people. Dust James, who was a member of his group. Everybody knows the story now. Well, some things I like about it. What attracted me, I'm not a member at all, but some things that attracted me, they're not afraid to go past shit, to talk to people and go past shit-lived narratives. Like, they actually had Tara Reid in their convention in Chicago recently, and I watched it. They had Tara Reid as one of their keynote speakers. Like, the rest of the left won't tell her she's Joe Biden's rape victim, literally, and the rest of the left won't touch her. And they not only that, they had Yamila Yeshatila, the head of the Pan-African Uhuru movement / Pan-African Socialist Party. I don't know, as I understand, Yamila Yeshatila left the Pan-African Socialist Party. They're closely related, but different groups. But anyway, they were raided, the victims of the FBI raid. And, left, as far as I know, I haven't seen any references to this. And there any other white Trotskyist groups, I haven't seen any references to this. They not only Maupin's group is CPI, the committee, I think it was Committee for Political Innovation. I haven't seen any references anywhere in the white left. Nobody wants to touch this. The fashionable liberal rad lib worship put the FBI. Oh, they're fighting fascism, so we gotta. That nonsense. Trump derangement syndrome is still revived and very much alive. That's insane. So not only did Tara Reid and Yamila Yeshatila, they had them as their keynote speakers, which is, well, Caleb Maupin handled it well. Said, I disagree with his politics. Yamila Yeshatila and his movement. We disagree. I disagree with his politics, but I strongly complete solidarity with him against FBI harassment. And I think that was a very good way to put it. And they weren't afraid to go beyond narratives. We're constantly bombarded by narrative control. And right and the left are in this. The right and you're both in this, but especially affecting liberals and the left is intense narrative. And they're not afraid. They weren't afraid to go to the people, to go to the masses, to get beyond these narratives. And I think that was a very good thing. I have different politics. I'm not a Marxist-Leninist. I'm a Trotskyist. I do think their project, CPI's project, Maupin's project, was to rebuild the Communist Party of Earl Browder. And I don't know if that's the way to go. I have big criticisms of that. I'm not an Earl Browder fan. The Communist Party of that era, to tell you they're horrible. They're absolutely horrible. And Caleb Maupin very frequently would call them out how horrible they are. And they had a fight. Caleb Maupin had a fight with the CPUSA. And I agree with Caleb on this. But the roots of the Communist Party today were back in the 30s. It's the same group. Earl Browder had this weird type of American exceptionalism. And, they were, anyway, late 30s, the Communist Party sabotaged any effort to create an independent party. They sabotaged it. They helped keep people back in the Democrats. And they also fostered labor bureaucracy, which came back to bite them in the ass. Later, the same labor bureaucracy, which they helped foster, attacked them and pushed them out. They were super horrible, the Trotskyists and other groups. So I don't know if that model is worth rebuilding, but, I don't, whatever, I didn't, and patriotic socialism, PATSOC, I don't know, I thought it was a bit silly, but I didn't, whatever, I didn't hate it either. It's, a lot of these other socialist organizations haven't really gotten too far and mired in opportunism, so, I didn't hate, I had some disagreements, but I didn't hate his group either. I was kind of intrigued by it, I admit. They were, not afraid to go against narratives, which the rest of the left seems to be totally embedded in right now. I really like that about them. I did have some theoretical disagreements, I can't deny that, but I admired what they were trying to do in some ways. What they were roundly mocked on Facebook, on the left, which made them more attractive to me. These same people who really didn't like me also hated Caleb Maupin's group, so it made them more attractive to me in some ways. Okay, anyway, what apparently happened, everybody knows it, it's all over the internet. So apparently, Caleb Maupin has he was basically a journalist. He had a show on RT, and RT America, and I think RT also, RT America was shut down. I believe he still has a spot on RT, I'm not sure about that. Anyway, he was originally in the Workers' World Party. He left, and he explained, I agree with, he left it, I agree with him in that. And he was well placed to build an organization. He had some media following. He was already well placed to build something. there are lots of leftists on media, but no one else, as far as I know, is really trying to build an organization. The PSL does have some people, Rania Kalik, Ben Nornigan, a few other people, Breakthrough News. I think they're one of their sites are they're involved in Sputnik, and more credit to them. But I'm not a fan of their politics either. They're kind of worse. So Caleb was in an ideal place to build something, and he did. And to his credit, he had these couple times a week, these chats, YouTube chats. I started getting into it. It was building community. He had a roll call. Let's see who's here. Couple dozen people would show up. It was building community. It was online. It was through the internet, but it was still building some kind of community. It was really cool. I didn't fully agree with him. I didn't hate him at all, but I didn't fully agree with him either. Sometimes I'd agree. Some of the stuff, yeah, brilliant, really great. Other stuff, 80% of it. Few of these things, some of the stuff he said I thought was pretty cringy. Other stuff he'd say that, yeah, I agree with it, but it's not the way I'd put it. Stuff like that. I think overall he played a positive role. And he was like an influence on other leftists. I could tell, definitely influence on other leftists. YouTube's Jackson Hinkle, for one thing. He was on the Jimmy Dore show. I know he was influencing friends with the Convo Couch, with Fiorella Isabel and Pastor Jardula. Like, he was an influence on them. He was beginning to be an influence and sort of like a pole of attraction. And generally a good thing. I didn't fully agree with him, but he was beginning to be a pole of attraction. Then... And the keynote, I mentioned Tara Reid, Yamila Yeshatila, Garland Nixon spoke, a variety of figures who I like Garland Nixon's cool stuff. Garland Nixon was there, Nick Brana from the People's Party was there. He was kind of building a pole of attraction of sorts. I'm not a Marxist-Leninist. I'm a Trotskyist. I have some severe criticisms of that approach, but save that for another time. Okay, so what happened? Everybody knows that the document is out. Document apparently about a week ago now. A couple of members of this organization was built as a think tank, not a party. I don't know what the difference is, but it was a think tank. But you have a bunch of very enthusiastic young people. I think they got about around 300 people by the time it imploded, and very enthusiastic. And he went to Nicaragua with two of his comrades and younger comrades, and they were very enthusiastic. Some really interesting stuff. Okay, so anyway, it came out documented a week ago. Some of his comrades said some really weird shit was going on. First of all, he's into S&M, sadomasochism. Nothing wrong with this at all. Absolutely nothing wrong with this at all. He's a sub. He apparently has a spanking fetish. Okay. Apparently his dad used to spank him as a kid, and he kind of, okay. Nothing wrong with this. Seriously, nothing wrong with this at all. But apparently, according to this document, he manipulated some of his one woman. He got her to spend so much time on her job, on like party work, organization work. She was fired from her job, and she worked as a professional dominatrix. And Caleb kind of manipulated her into this, and he was one of her clients. Some really yicky, weird stuff. According to some really weird, manipulative stuff. I don't know. People have to keep their sexuality, who are into like political organizing, have to keep at least for now, their sexuality out of political organizing. And there's so many organizations, some of this shit has happened. There have been abuse scandals on lots of organizations. I'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, this came out, and there was a big ruckus, and it was extremely embarrassing for Caleb, and the members of his group voted to disband. There was some turmoil. What do we do? He was the central figure in the organization. They would sell his literature, his books, and it imploded. I felt bad. I actually felt bad. Garland Nixon actually kind of... he talked about this in his YouTube channel. Interesting guy. He thought it was COINTELPRO operation, and Fiorella Isabel, the Convo Cow, she kind of thought the same thing, or seemed to. I don't know. I don't know. It's possible there. I don't know. I kind of doubt it, but who knows? It very well could be. They were connecting with working class people, starting to get beyond these shit-led narratives, and they want to snuff that out to begin. I'm kind of skeptical, but who knows? Who knows? Some socialist organizations, other socialist, I know a fair number over the years which imploded. First, the ISL was a really famous one. I think they collapsed in 2018, if I remember. I was briefly in it for about back in 2003 for I think about 3 months I was in it. I hated the Iraq War. I really hated the war. And I was interested in socialism for like a really long time before, but I didn't really know a lot about theory. I wanted to check out groups. I wanted to join Socialist Alternative. And I had two, like, what they call a contact discussion, a meeting with somebody who was recruiting. I originally thought they were a lot larger than they were. I had two meetings, and this guy never got back to me. He said, I'm interested in joining. I want to join. Okay, what's the next step? Well, go to one of our public meetings. So I did. But yeah, they never got back to me. This guy never got back to me. Very intelligent. I was really impressed. He never got back to me. And I tried emailing him a couple of times. He's never got back to me. Later on, I found out he was famous for cherry picking. He does this a lot. He was like build his own group of friends. He would cherry pick members. He was in charge of contact discussions, like recruiting new members. Somebody would sign a sheet and they're interested. He'd meet with them and do you want to join us or not? And he'd cherry pick people. He'd attract attractive young women, especially. He was famous for that. A lot of weird stuff going on. And people told me years later, I found this out, he was on the far right wing of Socialist Alternatives. Well, I won't say his name, but he was really famous for cherry picking. So, after this, I assumed they didn't want me. Because I'm trans, or some reason they did not want me. They thought, I don't know why. So I gravitated towards almost very close to a year later, I wanted to join a group. I gravitated towards the ISO. I didn't know a lot about socialist history or theory at that time, but yeah, I had a friend who was involved in the ISO and went on a trip to protest in D.C. Yeah, okay, cool. The trip was really disorganized, but yeah, sure, I joined. And I was in it for a couple of months. I didn't know much about theory, like whether their big thing is Russia is a state capitalist, not a deformed worker state. I didn't know at the time. I really didn't understand that stuff. So I joined. I got weird vibes. Very nice people in the ISO, but I got weird vibes of some interpersonal dynamics. It's kind of subtle stuff, but they work people really hard. And I felt I was older than a lot of people in it, but I felt they were treating me like I was a little kid. I was at the kids' table with a big, and I just get some subtle, very kind of subtle. Some of it was subtle, some of it was more overt. I picked up weird vibes, so I left after 3 months. My friend, who apparently was in the ISO, she was also in Socialist Alternative at the same time. You're not supposed to do that, but I found out. So I gravitated towards Socialist Alternative, and and they seemed like they weren't a much higher intellectual level, for one thing. The last big event, what happened with ISO, I'll just mention it. I went, I think it was 04, 05, there's a big protest. There was Bush was doing the ICE raids, and there's a protest in at the Immigration ICE Center in Rhode Island. I think it was Bedford, Rhode Island, if I remember. My friend invited me to go down with some Socialist Alternative comrades. I was officially in the ISO at this time, and it was like weird, it was like awkward. So I went there, and I was surprised a lot of ISO people were there. They never told me they were going, for one thing. They never told me they were going, and so this one branch leader, ISO branch leader, spotted me. She took me aside. She scolded me. Not for doing something with another organization, but for being there at all. I was supposed to stay home and read one of his books, The Meaning of Marxism by Paul de Motto. She just really roundly chewed me out for not obeying party orders and staying home and reading. That was freaking bullshit. I said, yeah, okay, sure. Then she wanted to meet with me and we're going to read Lenin's theory of party building. It was kind of, they wanted me to be an obedient cog, basically, while some much younger, like annoying undergrads had these little power trips. I picked that up. Later on, then, Socialist Alternative sounded a much better deal, and I joined them. I was in them for about 10 years. Half the time very active, the other half not as active, but it's a whole other story. Later on, I heard a lot of horror stories about the ISO, really abusive behavior. They had a branch in Burlington, Vermont, which they deliberately destroyed it, kicked people out. And the same thing, they branched in Rhode Island. They were pretty horrible towards a whole bunch of weird stuff. And then there was I think it was 2009, or I think it was 09. It was called the White Knee of the ISO. People of color was kicked out, not because they were of color, but there was basically a feeling that the organization wasn't spending enough time on issues of relating to people of color, and there was sort of a, so people were accused of forming a caucus which was against party rules and views. So anyway, they brought in the top leadership, and there's like kangaroo trials across the country. Just summarily kicked out people who had been in the organization for many years. Some of these people, based their lives on the organization, they were just kicked out. Anyway, I heard these horror stories about the ISO. Finally, in 2018, of course, my hair's in my face, the ISO imploded. Basically, all kinds of abuse started coming out. People were a couple of articles, and the floodgates were open. Mass torrents of horrific abusive behavior going on for many years. The reform slate got in. It turns out the leader of the reform slate was one of the leaders was exposed as a rapist, and membership just voted to disband and fuck it. Their published accounts, Haymark is now part of the ISO, part of the DSO. I thought the ISO had horrible politics, really horrible politics. Some of them joined the ISO. One group, the core, more left-wing core, the Revolutionary Socialists, they joined the Socialist Reconstruction, Socialist Resurgence. They're kind of like third campus foreign policy, which I disagree with. Anyway, that's the ISO. There were a couple other groups like that. There was MIM, Maoist International Group. They were batshit crazy. The ISO was not batshit crazy. MIM was batshit crazy. I used to read their stuff. They would have this weird. I used to read their paper. They would just like spell America with 3 Ks, America, KKK, or Canada. There was right Canada, Clanadia with 3 Ks. They thought all sex under patriarchy is rape. Like, how'd they have kids? This weird type of, they were extreme, Maoist third worldist philosophy. The first world working class are reactionary and totally dismissed as extreme third worldism. They were just weird. They were a little disturbing in some ways. Apparently they had a meltdown. Their leader was a guy named Henry. Apparently, their leader was a guy named Henry Park, who was actually a librarian at Harvard, Radcliffe. This group was actually people who worked in the library. They made themselves look like some militant prison group or militant third world group. They're actually librarians at Harvard and Radcliffe who were got into a weird current of Maoism. And apparently, Henry Park turned out to be clinically paranoid. The organization kind of had some kind of meltdown. I don't know what happened, but then there was it was weird. I used to read their stuff. They still do film reviews, which are funny. They're still online, batshit crazy, hyper ideological film reviews. It's kind of funny. There's one group which had a meltdown. There's another group. I can't think of their name. They kind of came out of MIM. They're communist they're Maoist third worldist hardcore. They had a meltdown too. One of their leaders was a heroin dealer and very lumpen character. Really homophobic, weird character. There was the Red Party. I don't know what happened with the Red Party. They were neo-Kautskists. That was coming out. They was coming out of the CPGB. One of the Communist Party of Great Britain had this like Kautsky revival based on Lars Lee, Norwegian dance instructor who works in Montreal. Basically, he revived a couple books reviving the reputation of Karl Kautsky. Said Lenin was more of a Kautsky. So anyway, this Red Party formed the U.S. It was supposed to be the American counterpart of the CPGB, like they were American Kautskys and neo-Kauts. And okay, I think a lot of young people. I was Facebook friends with some of these people. There's one woman who was transgendered. She was like this theoretician. I don't know what happened. They imploded. They voted to disband. I don't know what happened. They were interesting project. I don't know much about them. They voted to disband. There were a couple other groups like that. There was some sex abuse scandal in the PSL. A lot of these groups have these weird. Huge number of socialist organizations do have sex abuse scandals. I think it's just dynamic, like democratic centralism is applied very rigidly, and they become kind of cold. Like I don't know. But anyway, so hope you enjoyed my video, just kind of talking about stuff. So there's some people, Garland Nixon, who thinks the Caleb Maupin takedown was COINTELPRO operation. I don't know about that. Caleb, we dropped out of social media. It's extremely embarrassing for him. I kind of like the guy. I hope he has. I don't know what was going on. What he did is his answer to this was say, yeah, I made some mistakes. He had a public statement, which Fiorella Isabel from the counterpart from the whatever YouTube channel Mental Block. She read this off. She said, I made some mistakes. I let down people. I deeply apologize. Having said this document is a complete work of fiction, and I'm going to have my own version coming out. I got to straighten stuff out for a while, and he'll probably make a comeback. He's laying low. I don't know if he's still a show on RT. I don't know what he's doing. I kind of miss his shows. I didn't fully agree with him about a lot of stuff, but I didn't hate the guy either. So anyway, it's kind of a sad thing. I see what something else on the left comes along. I miss being in a socialist organization. I very much miss being in one, but I know what's around. I don't, not a lot around. But anyway, my next video I'm going to talk about water and food supply and things like that. I hope to do some like citizen journalism stuff. Anyway, I hope you enjoy my stuff, and if you enjoy, please like and subscribe. Thank you.